Yeah, I know. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. So our Parshah today is Ekev. And this has, before I begin, my disclaimer, this was a really meaty Parshah. It was, to put your arms around this, it took a lot, and especially when it spoke to you so profoundly. So I begin. In Parshah Eikev, which means because, Moshe tells Bnei Israel that if they carefully obey and are doers of Hashem's mitzvot, then Yochevave will maintain faithfully the covenant made on oath with their fathers. Hashem will favor them, bless them, and multiply them above all other peoples. And because Hashem loves Bnei Israel, he decides that when he's going to give them the promised land, he will cross ahead like a devouring fire. I don't know about you, but when you read something like that, how can you not lean? How can you not be overwhelmed and in awe? He crossed like a devouring fire. So that Bnei Israel did not become arrogant, Hashem revealed why he was giving them the land. It's not because of your virtues and your rectitude that you will be able to possess their country, but it is because of their wickedness that your God, Yochevave, is dispossessing those nations before you. And in order to fulfill the oath that Yochevave made to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Know then that it is not for any virtue of yours that your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. While there's a lot to learn from this parasha, I chose just 3 parts, 3 portions. I needed to be able to manage it a little. I want to begin with Deuteronomy 7:15. In Deuteronomy 7:15, Adonai, it states that Adonai will remove all sickness from you, and he will not inflict on you any of the terrible diseases of Egypt that you knew, but will inflict them on all who hate you. This verse will likely be the most memorable of verses from this parasha, because when we were doing our studies of Talmud and Torah, my son told me that perhaps this parsha will speak to me personally about the healing that I have not yet received. Hashem is giving revelation to our children, young and old, and Hashem speaks to us through them. I want to discuss a little this verse a little, but I want to do so with a story. I want to give one point of view on life and the adversities that we face. A gardener noticed a butterfly cocoon in one of the gardens that he tended to. He saw that it had a small opening, and he was intrigued and curious to see what the butterfly would look like. Maybe it was a monarch butterfly. And so he sat and watched the butterfly for several hours as it struggled to squeeze its body through the tiny hole. And then it stopped, as if it couldn't go any further. So the gardener felt compassion and tried to help the butterfly by taking a pair of scissors and snipping off the remaining bits of the cocoon. The butterfly emerged easily, but it had a swollen body and shriveled wings. The gardener continued to watch, expecting that at any minute, the wings would enlarge and expand enough to support the body. But did this not happen? This didn't happen. In fact, the butterfly spent the rest of its life crawling around. It was never able to fly. What the gardener, in his kindness and haste, did not understand was that the restricting cocoon and the struggle required by the butterfly to get through the opening was a way of forcing the fluid from the body and into the wings, so that it'd be ready for flight once it was achieved. Sometimes struggles are exactly what we need in our lives. Going through life with no obstacles would cripple us. We would not become as strong as we could have been, and perhaps we'd never fly. Now, many of you have probably heard this story before, and that's okay. I thought that it gave an idea of how I see my moment, my storm. When we see adversity and storm as an opportunity to grow and become the men and women that Hashem wants us to be, we're able to tap into a strength that we didn't think was available to us before. Hashem is full of compassion and loving kindness. And He also disciplines. So I do want to say that my son was right. I've been very stiff-necked. Very stiff-necked. Hashem is the sovereign of the universe, the Adon Olam, and the Lord of hosts. And sometimes we don't want to think that He would allow certain things. But it says in Isaiah 45:7, who forms light and creates darkness? Who makes peace and creates evil? I am the Lord who makes all these. He creates all, good and evil. The good news is that even if they don't know it, they both serve Him. So this is why we have to hold on to that, because when things look bad, there's something to be learned and there's a blessing there. When Hashem allows us to go through a storm, it's because He trusts us. And He knows that through that storm, we're going to continue to exalt Him and demonstrate His character. And He's not going to give us more than we can handle. And He will never leave our side. He is faithful and His loving kindness endures forever. That was the first one. And I probably will never forget that, ever. The second one was the manna. In this Parashah, we heard about the manna a few times. In Deuteronomy 8:2, it says, you are to remember all the way that Adonai your God had led you these 40 years in the wilderness, in order to humble you, to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His mitzvot or not. He afflicted you and let you hunger, that He fed you manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, in order to make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Adonai. I'm not sure if that sounds familiar. Neither man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Adonai. And neither did your clothing wear out, and your feet did not swell these 40 years. As we were studying that day, the Talmud, we saw in Yoma 75a that we read the commentaries. It said that manna could taste like whatever food you desired. It still could not bring the same degree of pleasure had it looked like, or had it had the presentation of that food. In Yoma 74b, it said, the commentaries state that the manna is referred to in this verse as an affliction, because one enjoys eating food that he sees more than he enjoys food that he cannot see. And the verse is Deuteronomy 8:16, where He says, He fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, in order to afflict you and test you, to do you good in the end. Bnei Israel stayed hungry and was not saturated by the manna. And perhaps the reasoning for this is that Hashem wanted them to stay hungry, because those that stay hungry learn, grow, advance. But those who get satiated, who are satisfied, they do not. A person who's satisfied, more often than not, feels that he has had enough and doesn't have any motivation to accomplish more. Hashem wants us to stay hungry for Torah. He wants us to perform mitzvot and actions that make this world a better place, a place that He could dwell in. Tikkun ha'olam. Now we get to the third part, the third portion. In Parshah of Eikev, Hashem gives us the mitzvot. So you will eat and be full, and you will bless Adonai your God for the good land He has given you. This mitzvot is not about food, and I don't know if you have ever, let's think of this. The sovereign of the universe asks us to bless Him. That is very powerful. In my eyes, it's as if my mom asked me to bless her. May her memory always be a blessing. It's a very powerful thing to hear. I want to share a little story. It's an embellishment of a poem. The poem is called The Silent Man and the Boastful Man. It's by Joshua the Shutter. There are two men buried side by side in the cemetery. Every night when the cemetery closes, they come up to talk about the life they left behind. the first man brags about the height of his tombstone in cost and in comparison to the second man's. And then he goes on to talk about his wealth and the business and the power and the influence that he acquired in life, without failing to point out that he did all this by his own merits. The second man remains quiet. He just listens. When the sun begins to come up, they go back down to their graves. Every night for decades, they rise, and every night for decades, the first man brags about his accomplishments in life. One night, the first man turns to the silent man and asks, "Why do you remain silent? Are you not proud of your accomplishments?" And the second man turns and responds, "In truth, I cannot boast. I did not acquire anything by my own merit. Every day of my life, I depended on the provision that came from my Father. I didn't go anywhere alone. I didn't accomplish anything alone. All came from Him. As I look at my grave, I do see that even in death, He cares for me. My tomb is clean, and I see many stones, new ones and old ones. At times, I hear the sobs of the children He gave me, my grandchildren, my young widow, those that I taught and those that worked with me." While the second man spoke, the first man looked at his grave and saw that it was overrun with weeds, and there weren't any stones. And for the first time in decades, he remained quiet. Hashem tells us that we are to bless Him when we have built good houses, when we're satiated, when we had enough to eat, when our herds and our flocks, all that's ours multiplies. When we have eaten and are satisfied, we are to remember Mitzrayim and the pain of bondage that our ancestors endured, what it felt like to want and not have, and the walk in the desert. Blessing Hashem acknowledges that all comes from Him. He gives provisions, talents, wealth, wisdom, and all that we have. Hashem asks us to bless Him when we're in abundance, because if we do not, we may forget Him. And we may begin to stray from His mitzvot. When we're satiated, when we're full, that is when the danger of forgetting exists. We will begin to say in our heart, "My power and the might of my hand has made me this wealth." In response to this mitzvot, we have Brechat Hamazon, or the grace after meals. And that's composed of the first blessing for the nourishment, the second blessing for the land, the third blessing for Jerusalem, the fourth blessing for Hashem's goodness. These blessings ensure that we are living intentionally, that we understand that Hashem doesn't need our blessings. On the contrary, He desires to bless us. And when we remember Him, and when we stay in intimacy, we're tapped into Him. In Parshah of Eikev, Hashem warns, at the end, He warns Bnei Israel, if they do forget Hashem and do go after other gods, they will perish, just like the nations that Adonai makes perish before them. Why did I pick these three portions, and why do they even matter? I would like to use a little parable that I ran by Sophia to get her approval on. It is a kid's parable, but I think it's very powerful. It's from Bracha Goetz, and it's based on a parable attributed to a famous rabbi, Maharam Mirotenberg. It's called Pick Your Table. For the kids it rhymes, but I changed it a little. I didn't want to come up here and start rhyming. There was once a great rabbi who had a dream one night, and in his dream he was given the opportunity to see 2 different banquet halls that people will end up when they die. The first banquet hall was big, spacious, gorgeous. The tables were set beautifully, and there was amazing food piled up high, but no one was eating. And the rabbi asked, "Why are these people starving?" And when he looked closely, he noticed that the people, someone had strapped on them 3-foot-long spoons, so they weren't able to bend their elbows. So they were hungry, and the food was right under their noses, but they didn't find a way of eating because they couldn't bend their elbows. The rabbi was then let out. He was in shock, and then he was led out to another hall. In the second banquet hall, it was identical. It was big, spacious, gorgeous. The tables were beautifully set. But the people there were sitting down and they were happy. They also had the 3-foot-long spoons strapped onto their arms so they couldn't bend their elbows. But in this place, each arm stretched out to the mouth of someone else to feed someone else. And the rabbi got it. He said, so that's it. He started to laugh. He said, here no one goes hungry. Here everyone gets to eat. The people in this hall, they used to be givers. And so not a minute passed by before these souls had figured out how to help the other guy. In this banquet hall also, the elbows could not bend. We know this. But that didn't stop them from reaching out and helping a friend. But those other fellows in the other banquet hall, they were so used to being selfish and just taking and taking, they cannot think of giving. Givers get used to giving, and selfish get used to taking. But if they knew where they would end up, they would correct that mistake. I selected these 3 portions because they're not only about food. They're about the fact that our actions here do have consequences. How we choose to live here carries over. I don't know with 100% certainty because I'm not there yet and I'm not in a rush to get there, but we know that how we live here does impact. What we invest here is an investment in heaven. So we need to remember our mortality as well. One day we're not going to be here. What are we leaving behind? What kind of relationship that we've built with people, with Hashem? Man does not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Adonai. And when we walk in his ways in obedience and bless him for all that he gives and all that he takes, we're showing that we trust him. He's never failed us, and he never will. Throughout this parashah, Moshe was reminding Bnei Israel. This is a reminder. It was a reminder of their rebellion, a reminder of their complaining, of the golden calf, of the Shema. He mentioned caring for the orphan and the widow, befriending the stranger, because we were once strangers in the land of Egypt. When Hashem sends you out, you're not to fear. We are to have humility. All wealth is divinely owned. And another thing that we needed to understand is that Bnei Israel is getting ready to go into the promised land. It's a game changer. It's not about wandering and being provided for. Now they were going to be in a different environment. The challenge wasn't going to be poverty. It was going to be affluence. It wasn't going to be insecurity but security. It wasn't going to be slavery but freedom. They needed to stay together, cohesive, driven, strong. And you're only as strong as your faith in your God. I thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.